Mr. Speaker, Bartley Kivas recently wrote that today's NDP have been whittling away at environmental funding. At the same time, they portray themselves as responsible stewards of Manitoba's lakes, rivers, forests, and diminished grasslands.
Indeed, the Premier is the provincial equivalent to Mr. Harper on the critical environment file, with the drastic cuts to Manitoba Conservation's roles important to environmental protections, water quality testing, fish habitat protection, and wildlife surveys and enforcement. Why is the Premier not a supporter of a better environment for Manitoba?
Mr. Speaker, the member will know that we've made very significant investments in the environment in Manitoba. First of all, we've supported the continuation of the experimental lakes region in terms of research, Mr. Speaker. We are the largest contributor to the International Institute for Sustainable Development. We have in front of the Government of Canada, they're leading with us on this, well, in partnership with First Nations, declaring the Pimatuina Key on the east side of Lake Winnipeg as the largest protected area of boreal forest in North America, Mr. Speaker. And all of those things, Mr. Speaker, go along with expanding. It goes along with expanding more parks in Manitoba, Mr. Speaker, which we have $100 million to invest in that. We're seeing very good results out of that. Mr. Speaker, more parks, the only UNESCO large landscape being protected in North America now, Mr. Speaker, investments in the International Institute on Sustainable Development, protection of the experimental lakes area, Mr. Speaker, and I'll give them more initiatives that we are furthering in Manitoba on the environment.
Mr. Speaker, recent surveys shows that Manitobans are very concerned about climate change. The increased flooding events in recent years are likely in part a result of climate change, but today's NDP don't seem concerned. They broke their promise and their legislated commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And indeed, today's future NDP has not even set future targets for greenhouse gas reductions. And the ones on their websites are 2012 targets, which they broke years ago and still haven't met. Indeed, in the last few years, today's NDP haven't even provided an updated plan to address climate change issues in Manitoba. Why has the Premier done so little to address climate change in our province?
Mr. Speaker, during the decade, the last decade from 2000 to 2010, our greenhouse gas emissions were flat at a time when the economy was growing at a record amount, Mr. Speaker, one of the best records in the country. And we have brought in some very significant innovations. We brought in an ethanol mandate to reduce the amount of emissions from gasoline. We brought in a biodiesel mandate to reduce the amount of emissions from diesel. Our hydro exports alone, Mr. Speaker, are worth 62.6 megatons of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions in other regions of the Midwest, Mr. Speaker, the equivalent of taking 12.5 million vehicles off the roads. That's just our hydro exports, Mr. Speaker. We have a peat moss moratorium going on in Manitoba, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we're investing over $1 billion to protect Lake Winnipeg from eutrophication. Our environmental initiatives are widespread, Mr. Speaker. I'd be happy to inform him in his next question of other initiatives we're taking in Manitoba.
Mr. Speaker, last week I asked the Premier when he was going to call the Clean Environment Commission review into the Energy East pipeline.
And he said,
the Premier, instead of answering the question, referred to the National Energy Board review. A significant concern about the Energy East pipeline is its impact on climate change and greenhouse gas production. The National Energy Board will not look into this, so I ask again, when will the Premier call the Clean Environment Commission review of the Energy East pipeline to adequately consider issues surrounding greenhouse gas emissions and climate change? Or is the Premier, as many suspect, not really concerned about climate change or our environment?
Mr. Speaker, I recommend the member check in with the federal Liberal Party who are supporting the Energy East pipeline, Mr. Speaker. The reality is this: when it comes to the Energy East pipeline, we want to make sure we protect our water, We want to make sure we protect the environment. We want to make sure we have safe communities. And that is the reason we have applied for full intervenor status in the National Energy Board hearings. The premiers of the country are working together on an overall energy management as well as climate change strategy for the country, Mr. Speaker. Policy should be made in the legislatures. That's where we're doing it, Mr. Speaker. We've got some of the better recycling programs going on in the country with producer responsibility. I've indicated to him our fuel initiatives. I've indicated to him our park initiatives. I've indicated to him what we're doing to protect the boreal forest. And I've indicated to him what our hydro exports are valued at, Mr. Speaker, in terms of over 62 megatons of reductions, 12 million vehicles off the road. Mr. Speaker, we believe there are other innovations. Power Smart programs, some of the best in the country. Every home that enters into a Power Smart program can reduce up to 5 tons of emissions by installing a geothermal system, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
And we will
the Honourable First Minister's time for this question has elapsed.